Hey, how goes it?
I'm good. How you doing, man?
I am good. I'm good. Is the episode ready?
What episode? I don't have an episode.
Not again.
This is how I roll by the seat of my pants. So, I don't know. What should we talk about this week?
How about places to visit in the medieval world?
Oh, we already did that. We did that one.
Christine de Pizan?
Did it?
Oh, jeez. Yeah, scratching the bottom of the barrel. Something quick. Year in the review. How's that?
Let's do year in review. Let's do year in review. Okay, year in review. Here we go.
All right. Do.
Welcome to the Medieval Podcast, everybody. We're going to talk about a year in review this week. Some news stories, some podcasts, some of our favorite articles and stuff that went on in 2019, the end of the year, the end of a decade, which is kind of a big deal. So, Peter, what happened this year that you thought was important for the medieval news?
Okay. In terms of like the wider world of the medieval world, the big story obviously is the fire that happened at Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. I remember I was like at my office just working away, and like I see a tweet about, oh, there's a fire. And so I start taking a look at it, and there's like more and more tweets, and then I see video, and I know, oh, this is going to be bad. But at the same time, like I have to kind of put in my journalism hat and start covering it. But like, yeah, I'm like in tears, like watching this great medieval church, go down in flames over the next few hours, and meanwhile, the eyes of the world are caught on it. So.
Yeah, it was funny how affecting that was because, I mean, it's something that is one of those things where you never expect it to happen, right? That thing has been around for hundreds of years. Even though it's burned down before, that's something that you know about, but it's not something that you think about. And then to see it, yeah, it was a really big moment. I think that was back in April.
Yeah, this kind of like news. It's certainly captivated the world, and it remained for the next it's like week or so. It was like the number one news item because there was lots of things like how was the fire started, which was confirmed to be like just an accident. The people were working on the roof. How much was saved? How much of the building has been saved? Also, the repair and all the kind of funds and donations, and that caused a bit of a storm just because of the hundreds of millions of dollars that were raised for this church, where many people were talking about, well, maybe there are better uses for people's donations than a medieval building. So there was a lot of controversy, a lot of news about it. There still is, even like early as this week, there was little reports about if parts of the structure might not be able to be saved because it has been damaged. What's going to happen when the scaffolding gets taken down? Will some of the building collapse? So they're not even still sure that the building can be saved structurally, and how many years it's going to take to rebuild, where like the early estimates of like a 5-year rebuilding plan seem to be overly generous at this stage.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And I was really happy to see that they were able to save a lot of things, like the rose windows. That was a huge deal for me to see that. So that was one of the biggest stories of this year for sure. One of the biggest stories for me was the one about the nun with the blue teeth. And that was actually one of our early episodes. That was episode 5, where we talked about the people who found lapis lazuli in the teeth of skeleton of a nun. And that was a really exciting one because it showed that she was painting. That was a really big deal. What was the reaction online with medievalist.net about that?
Oh, that was, yeah, it was again like one of the bigger stories. It was really popular. Again, a lot of news outlets kind of covered it, and it was just it's a wonderful tale. Like I always kind of imagine like this is this great discovery. It's not crucially important in the wider world, but it does show how our advances, like the scientific advances in just determining what we can learn about the past, is just exponentially increasing. So
yeah, and that was a great story because I remember talking to Alison Beach, who is this historian who's involved in the project, and she was talking about how this is something that we knew was going on. We knew women were painting and doing illustrations and stuff, but it's very hard to prove that through archaeology and through science. And actually, the techniques that they used to find this blue pigment in the teeth of the nun are ones that they are able to use on other projects since. So that was a huge deal. And I was really happy we were able to talk with a bunch of the members of the team on the podcast. That was awesome. That was back in January. Yeah, it was a good story. What other stories did we have in 2019?
Another really good story was this discovery of a painting by Cimabue. He's this medieval artist, Italian artist, kind of like a forerunner to the Renaissance. And it just happened that a piece of his was sitting in someone's kitchen in north of Paris for last few decades. They took it in to be valued, and they did not realize that it was such a beautiful medieval artwork, and it wound up selling at auction for $26 million. It shows you, again, like more importance of art, and this is a piece, hopefully it'll go into a museum one day, but I don't know who bought it. Those things kind of remain private, but it was, again, nice little discovery.
Yeah, and it was hanging above a hot plate. It was still in really good shape, which I think is great. Great. It's one of those things where I think members of the family didn't think it was important at all, and it ended up being a priceless object, which is great. Yeah, and now that's been something that everyone's been able to see across the world, which is great, even though it's now in a private collection. But speaking of art, this is a big year for people who are fans of Leonardo da Vinci as well, right?
Yeah, this was the 500th anniversary of his death this year, so it focuses minds and focuses museums. So we had a lot of kind of little pieces of news about finding works by him, kind of doing research on him, and also there was a very big show at the Louvre, I think still ongoing right now, bringing as much of his artwork together. It was, again, a nice, like kind of a way to kind of commemorate this artist. And I consider him a medieval artist, so wound up kind of covering a lot about that this year.
Yeah, I mean, why not claim Leonardo da Vinci, right? It seems like a good plan. And speaking of museums, for the podcast, we covered a new exhibit at the Aga Khan Museum, which was about medieval Africa, which was really great and really interesting. And so we had those pictures up on medievalist.net on Instagram, and we talked to the curator of the Aga Khan Museum about that. And that exhibit's still going on. So that was another really exciting thing that was happening this year in Toronto at the Aga Khan Museum. Caravans of Gold is the exhibit that was on, and it's still on, which is something to see if you're up north. Coming up to Toronto in the winter is not always the best idea, but if you are around, that's a really great exhibit that's going on. What else is in the news this year, Peter?
In terms of other discoveries, there was another piece of the Lewis chessman discovered. And again, it was another case where family owned it for like generations, I believe, and they only realized, hey, this is actually something. Again, went out for auction, and I can't remember the price right off the top of my head, but again, it sold fairly well. These are really kind of interesting discoveries, and say there's still stuff out there to be found. So.
Yeah, I think this one was in a bag in a drawer, wasn't it? Where they just peek at it every once in a while and be like, oh, that's grandma's piece of art that's stuck in the drawer. And it turned out to be one of the Lewis chessmen, which is a huge deal. Those pieces are so rare and interesting, and there's still a few missing. So who knows? You might have one in your grandma's drawer. And one of the other things that was discovered this year was a fragment of Vasanas' Canon of Medicine. And that was another thing we covered for the podcast back in March. And this was another thing where there were assumptions that Avicena was being studied in Ireland, but there wasn't proof of it. They found a little fragment of Vasanas' Canon of Medicine bound into another book, and it found its way back to Ireland to be looked at, which was another really great story. And that was episode 12 of our podcast, if you're interested in that story, with Padraig O'Mahon. Are there any other news stories that we should recap from 2019?
One more that I want to kind of cover for here, and I'll have, like, before the end of the year, you'll see on medievalist.net like a kind of our top 10 lists of news of 2019. But one is this discoveries of Viking ships, and there was a couple this year, and I believe another one last year, that have all been discovered through georadar. So this is kind of like just going over the top, taking a good guess at where it might be, and these are cases in Norway. It's really interesting, again, like new technology kind of being used to explore the medieval past and finding it, and then like the decisions are like, when are we going to excavate it, or if we are, how much can we learn at this point. Again, it's a lot of possibilities are kind of emerging on how we can kind of find things using latest technological tools. And I think over the years we've kind of covered like looking at manuscripts, the ability of people on their own use metal detecting to kind of find all these great finds. And every year on medievalist.net we report, I seem like dozens of people have discovered this coin or this treasure haul, and some are really impressive. There's always things being found, and that's great.
And actually, this is something that's on Peter's bucket list, if you don't know this about him, is to get a metal detector and find a really interesting piece of history just walking around Europe somewhere. Right, Peter?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to try and ask someone to see if anyone in England wants to take me out for like a day walking like through like the hills of Yorkshire, and beep, 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 beep. And all of a sudden, like I'll dig and I'll find this cross and this, pile of gold, and
and a ship and all that stuff to go with it. So some of the other things that went on obviously this year were we had a bunch of articles up every week at medievalists.net, and we had a whole bunch of podcasts. What are we up to now? I think we are up to 45 podcasts with this one, which is not quite every week, but that is almost 52 weeks of the year, which is pretty impressive. So what were some of the other things that came up this year that were exciting? Articles, podcasts? What was exciting for you this year?
Like this, again, this is the first year we've done the podcast, and I've been, really happy and excited. Almost 52. Not quite. Almost. But, so it's okay. It's all right. But,
yeah. How many episodes of the Medieval Warfare podcast did you have out this year? Do we need to get into that? We don't need to get into that. All right. Were there episodes that you liked of the podcast this year?
I really enjoyed your talk with Michael Livingston. In part, like he was actually at the same time doing a piece in a Medieval Warfare magazine about Agincourt. It was I loved it. It was a nice controversial talk. Some, again, new discoveries, some interesting research, promotes some talking. So with the podcast, there's been a lot of kind of great guests. I was very happy for Natalie Zeman Davis to join us for that talk. I've been a big fan of hers for many years, and she was literally one of the first people that we interviewed on the website way back in 2008. We did like a kind of like an email interview. So I love that, kind of it's gone now that we've gone to like an audio recording, and she was a great historian, and I was really happy that you could have a chance to talk with her.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet Natalie Zeman Davis. She was so nice. And we got to talk about Trickster Travels, and that's just such a really interesting story of Leo Africanus. And she just knows everything. That was a really good one. And speaking of coming full circle, it was full circle for me because a couple weeks later, I spoke to Dan Jones, who was my first interview ever on Medievalist.net. I interviewed him over Skype in 2015 over Magna Carta, and I was like completely nervous. And now here we are years later, just having a good time on the podcast. That was really fun. Speaking of coming, full circle, I got to meet a few of my heroes this year. Speaking of Natalie Zeman Davis, people that I've just loved their work for years, like Ruth Mazo-Karras. I never met her before, and really, really interested in her work on sexuality in medieval Europe. And her book, Common Women, which is on prostitution, was one that was really formative for me. So meeting her was really amazing. And that was back in February. We were talking about marriage just in time for Valentine's Day. And another one of my heroes that I got to meet this year was Helen Castor, whose writing is just amazing. And it was really nice to meet her and talk to her about queenship. We were talking about her book, She-Wolves, and that was just a great time as well. So, I love all the episodes, but those are a couple of my heroes that I got to meet this year, which is really great. Well, you're really into Vikings, Peter, so you probably appreciated the episode we did with Leszek Gardella, right? We were talking about Viking warrior women. Was that a highlight for you this year?
Yeah. Like Leszek is someone I've got to know over the last couple of years, and I'm really fascinated by the work he's doing. He's, again, kind of uses a lot of archaeological research. He's looking into these really kind of fascinating topics. He wrote a book, and I don't think it came out probably a couple of years ago, but on Viking magical items and stuff like that. So, which was really kind of fun read to look at, and hopefully we're gonna have a little bit more with him coming up in the new year. You'll see him appearing on Medievalist.net a little more regularly.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really great one for me because I don't know a lot about Vikings. So I learned a lot from Leszek. That was a good one. We also covered a lot of topics that I think they're important to me that we talk about in terms of the Middle Ages. We talked about things like disability with Keisha Tracy. That was a really good one. We talked about medicine with Winston Black, and that was another really good one. Just things that I'm not sure everyone thinks about when they think about the Middle Ages. Like, we think about kings and queens, but we need to also think about people who were just regular people and what were their challenges. And so I was really happy to talk about things like disability. I like the stuff that's about people that are just everyday people. And so I want to have more of that next year, but those were some of the ones that I thought were interesting as well.
One thing I was really happy with is the variety of episodes that you've been able to do. Like, I think when we talked about it, like before this show began, was like, let's not have this just kind of focus on like the very popular topics, but try and give our audience, a really good overview of what's being talked about amongst medieval scholars and like interest to like the wider community. So we wanted, again, to have a show that is very broad, has a kind of a broad appeal, and not just kind of focusing, like, because we could have done like, here's the 100 Years War. We're going to do like an 8th-part series on the 100 Years War, and I'm sure that we have a lot of listeners come in on that. But I think talking about medicine or daily life or even like things like writing was a nice balance.
Yeah, that's what I was going for when I was starting to choose people for this podcast as well. And I really wanted to pull in people that were interested about quirky things as well, which is why our very first episode was about coconuts with Kathleen Kennedy. And I still like that conversation we had about coconuts, and Kathleen even made the coconut sounds from Monty Python for us, which I thought was great, because I think that there are things that draw people to the Middle Ages that are quirky, and coconuts is one of them. And then we also talked about fiction as well. We had Candace Robb on here. We had Guy Gabriel Kay on here. I actually read a story from the Middle Ages. Like, we had fiction as well. So there is a nice balance, I think, of history and fiction, social history and literature and war and all those things. And that was really a goal. So what kind of articles on medievalist.net really stuck out for you this year? Because we're talking about the podcast and the variety of stuff that we have on that. We want to keep doing that. But, I mean, the website's been going on with lots of stuff as well. What were some highlights for you?
I just love the kind of the work that like all our columnists have been doing. Adam Ali, who's kind of looking at the Islamic world, is producing like really top-notch kind of stuff, really lengthy pieces. So like, if you have a chance, if you have like an hour, you can kind of read through his articles.
But I like that because, you can get really in-depth stuff on the web, and it's free to read. It's not stuff that you have to get behind a paywall to read.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and we finished up a series on Augustine in the Middle Ages, which I was really, really happy that we could have produced. That was by Shari Boots, and that was started 18 months ago. It was something like, again, it's not particularly like huge numbers of people are going to come in and read it, but I thought it was a topic that deserves a kind of spot to be like, because he was such an important figure in the medieval world that it was something that we can nicely cover. So I was really, really happy that series came to its natural end, and we were able to kind of present it. So.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, he's a very important figure, and yet he's one that not everybody knows a lot about, and they need kind of an entryway into learning about him. So it's good to have a series, I think, on medievalist.net about that. And yeah, that one went on for about 18 months, and it's just finished up. But of course, it's still available to everyone if they want to look it up, right?
Yeah, exactly. We've got that. We have now about 7 or 8 different columnists that will come on each month, including you, Danièle. So we get about 3 pieces of you each month, which we get like some fun stuff that you've been able to write. And yeah, we've got like a team of writers. We'll probably add like 1 or 2 more in the new year as well. So hopefully there's always kind of new content every week for our audience to read and enjoy.
Yeah, I write about 3 articles every month, and then my old ones will come back up on social media. So if you haven't read them before, you can read them. I've been writing for medievalist.net since 2013. So there's a bunch of stuff there. But there are 3 that stick out for me this year that I wrote chronological order. The first one being the one on Gwerfyl Mochyn, the one about Medieval Sex Lives, which I just love. That one was so much fun to write. It's not safe for work, but it's super, super fun to write. And that went pretty far. I think a lot of people read that one. So that one was a highlight for me in the earlier part of the year. And when we're talking about books last week, I was really talking about that book as being one that I really liked. And I think the second one that really kind of sticks out for me is the one I wrote about Richard the First. Do you remember this one where it was like how he got his name Lionheart?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that one? So the short version of the story is this was a romance that was written about Richard a couple hundred years after he had died, and they were trying to figure out like how did he get the name Lionheart. And the short answer is like he was up against a lion and he like reached into the lion's mouth and like pulled out his beating heart and like dipped it into the salt cellar on the table and ate it in front of the king who had him in prison. That was just like an awesome story. I'd never come across this. Like if you get the chance to read that edition, and you can find it on medievalist.net, I think it's a Broadview version of that poem. I mean, it's just awesome. It's ridiculous. And I mean, there's cannibalism in it. Like, it is a sensational story, and it tells you kind of a lot about the culture, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there's some ugly stuff in that as well. But pulling out just that one story about like eating the lion's heart was really, that one was fun for me. And then the last one was the one about medicinal cures using dung. That was animal dung. That was another one that I really enjoyed. And I was just kind of recapping that one. I'm hoping that everyone will go and read the original Scholars article. And of course, I'm drawing a blank on her name right now. But I'm hoping that everyone will actually read her translations of this, like medicinal uses for animal dung, because, well, they're awesome. I mean, if you have a cough, all you need to do is drink some chicken poop and you're good. Like, it's not chicken soup, it's chicken poop. Those are probably my 3 favorite ones that I wrote this year. Are there other ones not that I wrote, but other ones that you thought were interesting this year?
Well, I'll just talk a little bit of one that I wrote on medievalist.net, and it's about flying in the Middle Ages. And I come across like these kind of stories where, a monk would, try and fly, and he crash, and people so and I wanted to kind of take a look and put all these stories together and see like what was happening. And like you do see this kind of pattern where like you see different things in medieval Europe and Middle East. People are trying to figure out how to glide, and basically they're building gliders. The big challenge though that they have is stopping. Some of them, can take off for a bit, and some of these, like, say, they went like probably equivalent of 100 meters, so a fairly far distance, but they don't know how to like safely land, and so they can get badly hurt. So you have that kind of narrative, and there's about like a dozen attempts that we know of. Some people being killed, but others, making out fairly unscathed as well. But meanwhile, in China, you have a different where people are using kites. And there are stories of being flown quite a large distance through kites, and just items being sent back and forth like through the air. You can see medieval people are trying to put like some interesting thought into how these things run. I spent a while researching and kind of put it up. It didn't do particularly well on the website because people just don't care about flying, I guess. But
they must, though, because December is the anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight. So this might be the time for this article to take off, as it were.
Yes, maybe I'll put it out online again. So, but I don't get to do enough of my own research. Just like the day-to-day running of the business keeps me pretty busy. But like when I can, I try and write some stuff and try and get other kind of pieces out there. So, but right now, like I have this wonderful team of columnists and writers and a podcaster, and thanks to your hard work, it's made a lot easier for me.
Oh, you're getting all sappy now. It must be December. This was a big year for me. I guess we should talk about things that were important to us as well. So this is a big year for me personally because 2 big things happened. I'm probably forgetting other things, but two big things happened. The first one was I won the Lone Medievalist Award for Scholarly Outreach, which was just a huge deal for me because I love the fact that we are starting to recognize scholarly outreach as being something that's important. So that was a big deal for me. I was very happy to receive that, and I'm so grateful for it. That was the first big thing that happened for me. Anything big happened for you this year that you can think of?
You know, like I've been working with the Medieval Warfare magazine, being the editor of that. It's just been an enjoyable kind of time. Thankfully, again, I have lots of authors. I've, had to write a couple of articles, one on the sack of Rome that I really, really enjoyed. Actually, no, I'll take that back. I really didn't enjoy writing that article. I thought that was actually a fairly tough piece for me emotionally. This is an event that happens in 1527, and it's just brutal, a brutal scene. Like the tagline is, "Hell itself was a more beautiful sight than Rome's," which is what one of the commentators at that time said it was, and yeah, it's quite true. So.
Yeah, and people can find these back issues of Medieval Warfare, including that one, if they go online, right?
Yeah, that's through the publisher Carwin-Sari, but you can find it through medievalist.net as well. So, yeah, again, those two things, that's basically my life, is either medievalist.net or Medieval Warfare magazines.
Yeah, well, you gave a paper at Kalamazoo as well this year, right? You were talking about big speeches.
Oh, geez, I forgot all about that. Yes, I was talking about battle speeches at Sverris Saga, this 13th century saga of late 12th century Norwegian king. And I just wanted to kind of show, like, when you're a king, but you have to kind of really rally your troops because you're not sure they're going to follow you. How do you give them a speech? And so, yeah, I had a chance to do that at Kalamazoo this year, and we'll be back at Kalamazoo next. So.
Yeah, and I think that's really actually a great topic because often, so often you see a medieval movie and there's always a rousing speech in front of like the big field of battle before they go on. And I'm not sure that that's something people think about when they think about Vikings and Viking saga. So I think that's really interesting. You enjoy doing this paper?
Yeah. Like his speeches are different. It's like, please fight for me. And if you don't fight for me, like I'm leaving. I'm gonna flee the country. That's his kind of speech. And it worked, I guess. He became king. So.
That's very inspiring. It sounds like emotional blackmail to me, but the Viking sagas, they're interesting because they are actually very emotional things. And do you think you'll come back to the Viking sagas again?
Yeah, I'm actually this latest issue of Medieval Warfare. We're just finishing it up right now. Is looks at the Sturlunga eras of Iceland, which is the 13th century. Basically, there's a civil war in Iceland. And it's a fascinating time, and something like an issue I've really wanted to create when I became the editor. So now we're finally getting that out, and that should be arriving on people's shelves in sometime in January.
That is exciting news. And speaking of which, I'm actually going to be writing for Medieval Warfare again. I haven't written for Medieval Warfare in a while, but I'm very excited to be writing for Medieval Warfare again because I get to write about King Arthur, who I haven't gotten the chance to work on for a while. So that's going to be exciting. And that's going to be in early 2020 as well. So I said there were two things that were super exciting that happened to me this year. The first one was winning the Lone Medievalist Award for Scholarly Outreach. And the second one was, of course, my book came out, and it was very exciting. It was so much work, and now it's out. It came out in the UK, September 30th, and now it's available, in the United States on Amazon and in Barnes and Noble stores, which is very exciting for me. So this was another big thing that happened to me this year.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you. Like, I know how much work you've kind of put into this. I guess it's your first published work by an outside, because you've done self-published things before, but this it's has an extra sense of hey, we're going to put out in stores, here a physical copy for you to hang on to. I knew you could hit a home run with this kind of book, and you did so. I want to promote it to the moon. So if I would say if you see her book on the bookshelves at a store, please take a photo and send it to us. You're getting all teary-eyed now too.
No, it's a cool idea to have it sitting on a shelf, and tag at 5MIN Medievalist, 5 Minute Medievalist, because I want to see it. I want to see it on shelves. Because in Canada right now we don't have it on the shelves. We do have it available through Indigo. So you should be able to get that either pre-order, or it will be just out as this podcast is out, so that people can find it. Actually, I think, you know what, it is available on Indigo right now, so that's something for us Canadians to find. But I haven't seen it on a shelf yet, and that's very exciting for me. And it's a big jump for me, as you say. I did self-publish 2 books. The first one being The 5-Minute Medievalist, which was a collection that I did of stuff I'd written for medievalist.net. So 13 really popular articles and a couple of new ones. And then I wrote the Guide to Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse Using Medieval Technology. And that was really interesting. And both of those were kind of my sense of humor. And they were both kind of out as things that you would find on the internet really easily, that kind of tone, that kind of humor. And so to write this book was, well, it's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger in scope, and it's a lot wider in range, talking about this whole continent during this time. And so that was a big project for me. It really kind of expanded my horizons. So it's not just having a publisher, but it was a big project. And so I'm happy to see it out. I'm still nervous about it. So if you liked it, let me know, because Peter has to hear me being nervous about it every week. But yeah, that was another big thing that happened in 2019. What else should we mention that happened in 2019? Have we covered all the bases?
Well, we started a podcast called the Medieval Podcast. Officially kind of launched January 1st, I think. So it's been a year. What are your thoughts about doing it? Like, has it met your expectations? Like, what were you thinking? Like, when we came up with this idea, and like, you know, I said, I want you to talk for 30 minutes each week.
Well, we came up with this idea separately, and we decided to do this together, team up, as it were. Peter likes to say he's my boss. He's not my boss, but we collaborate on a lot of things. So we collaborate, and this is something we decided to do together, and it was really kind of an experiment. We started this, and I started this without really knowing what I was doing. And we weren't sure if it was going to fly or not. And actually it has, which has been really great. And I really have to thank everybody who's listening, because you've really been patient with all the mistakes I've made, especially with technology as I learned this stuff. This is stuff that is brand new to me. And so, you know, it's been a huge learning curve, but also just so awesome, because we've been able to talk about such interesting stuff and get it out to a lot more people. And I think that it's really getting to people in that place where they have that love for the Middle Ages, just the stuff that's funny and interesting and weird and that kind of stuff, and that you don't often find in a lot of history books, unless you read my history books, in which case you do come across my sense of humor a lot. But this was something that was an experiment. We weren't sure if it was going to work, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out so far. I'm really looking forward to next year.
Oh, great. Yeah, like, I think, like, you know, I've been so happy to see, like, the audiences kind of grow with almost each episode. We see, like, you know, a growing audience where, you know, every week we see new people that seem to be listening to every episode, which is really grand to see. We get to see some feedback from the audience, people liking, you know, this interview, people talking about it on social media, people wanting me part of the podcast, which is really great. We wanted to see if this would connect with the audience, and there's a lot of, you know, technological challenges with us, because it's first, like, besides, you know, just doing the interviews, you're doing all the editing, doing all that kind of work at the back end of it, that requires a lot of, you know, learning and things like that. So there's challenges with it, but I think, you know, you've really kind of you've enjoyed doing it, and you know, it's skills that you love to have, right? So
yeah, I mean, you never waste things that you learn, right? Skills are important, but more, it's just been a whole lot of fun talking to people and learning stuff, because I learn stuff every week alongside the people that are listening. I mean, I do have a fairly good background in this stuff, you know, I've been working on it for a long time, but I don't know everything about everything. So it's great for me to talk to experts about specialty stuff and learn a lot more about that. That's been really exciting. I really do enjoy every minute of it.
One other thing I just want to say before, like, we started this year, is a Patreon. Again, like, this is like an idea that had kind of been brewing for a while, where we realized like this medievalist.net and the medieval podcast is built. We need advertising to make it run. It's a model that we want to move away from because we want to be a sustainable site. And advertising is one way, but it's not the best way. Patreon seems to be like the wave of the current and perhaps the future, and also get in touch with your audience a bit more, bring them what they like. And so we've kind of been building that Patreon, and the medieval podcast has been a big part of building that, where we're over 100 people now. We've been able to start a book club with it, and it's hopefully something that we can grow. And if we can reach certain levels, we'll be able to cut out pretty much all the advertising off of medievalist.net and have this be like kind of a true kind of community supported model, which would be wonderful, and be able to bring us, we'd be able to, with that, bring up more writers, more podcasts. Maybe we could have you do 3 a week.
I think 1 a week is good, but maybe we could get an editor so our sound would be good every week. I think that is on my wish list.
Okay. We'll talk about that. Again, I think medievalist.net itself is we're the strongest we've ever been. We've got like a big team of people that contribute, that support us, and I'm really thankful for everyone that's been even sending us good vibes over the last year. Thank you for your support, and it just makes me want to do more and more. So thanks.
Yeah, definitely a big thank you to all the people who are supporting us on Patreon, even at the $1 level. Like, it's just a huge difference, and it helps us because we are a very small operation, and it's one of these things where the more that you work from home and do this kind of stuff from home, the more you're not sure how a community is going to react to anything. So those good vibes that Peter is talking about, those compliments and comments and suggestions and all that stuff, they're so important, and we're really grateful for all of that all the time. All those people, we have people listening in South America, shout out to you. People in Europe, people who are listening while they're working out and telling me on Instagram, shout out to you. That's awesome. So thank you everybody for listening and for contributing. We are just so grateful that you're there as our audience. Peter, what's on the website this week?
If you want to learn about the Yule cat, which was a more dangerous type of feline from medieval Iceland, that you can read about that. And we've been actually busy over the last couple of weeks doing stuff promoting like some of the books that have come out in 2019. So we have a few lists out there. So if you're interested in the Byzantine world or medieval warfare, we have like lists of books for you to check out. So that's what's on the website.
All the books. And as always, you can follow medievalist.net on Facebook or Twitter at medievalists. You can find them on Instagram as well, at medievalists. You can find me at 5MIN Medievalist or 5 Minute Medievalist. And just thank you everybody for all of the support this year. Really appreciate your listening and being part of our community. And we're really looking forward to 2020. That sounds like the future, doesn't it? 2020. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much everybody for listening, and have a great 2020.
Thank you again. Enjoy your Christmas holidays. Enjoy your New Year's, and come back, and we'll have some fun episodes, and we'll figure it out. We as we always do, we plan months in advance for these things. So yes, looking forward to hearing from you. And let us know your suggestions, and feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy 2020, everybody.